Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inshallah, right now we'll be starting or continuing with Surah Yusuf. Ya صاحبي السجن أما أحدكما, and we left off at when Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, of course, he would tell صاحبي السجن, and he would tell them the dream, the interpretation for the dream. A number of things to mention when we're talking about dream interpretation is that not every single dream is necessarily going to be a dream that may be interpreted. Only certain dreams can be interpreted, and those dreams are usually the rare dreams. Not always. How do I know if this one needs interpretation? The dreams that may have interpretations are usually very quiet dreams. There's not much of background noise. It's a short dream, and you could feel it on the inside that there is something different about it. It's a calm dream. Sometimes it's a repeated dream where you dream with around that scenario a number of times. So certain things to feel, and especially if, for example, you're not feeling angry, you're not feeling scared, you're not screaming. So, just to help you see that. And it's usually very silent. There's not lots of background noise in the dream. There's not lots of pain in the dream. It's usually very specific. But with dreams that are from shaitan, there's going to be fear. There's lots of screaming. There's lots of the person is annoyed. The person is feeling scared. The person is feeling irritated. All that stuff. There's lots of background noise. There's a lot of irritation. Unlike the other dream, the dreams that are adghathu ahlam, it could be adghathu ahlam could be as a result probably of overeating, or adghathu ahlam can be just different hormones in the body just doing their things, and usually it's, there's not a specific scenario. It's a confusion of so many different things surrounding that dream, in where it's probably you're angry at your mother-in-law, or you're angry at yourself, or you're afraid, or you probably lived a certain trauma and it's just coming back at you. So those dreams are adghathu ahlam. Those are part of that adghathu ahlam, and those aren't the ones to be interpreted. Ya صاحبي السجن أما أحدكما فيسقي ربه خمرا. And we talked about how Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, before starting the dream interpretation, he was doing that da'wah to them, in where he's telling them about worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also said in here, and this is really important, that segment of it, ما تعبدون من دونه إلا أسماء سميتموها أنتم وآباؤكم, that they're made up names. And this can actually be true in so many different things, even when it comes to the different philosophies that surround us. A lot of the philosophies that surround us, many times, people are fascinated by a certain explanation, or a certain interpretation, or probably a certain jargon that may be used, or a certain name that it might be given, and people would think of it as, oh, this is knowledge presented right here, when in reality it could actually be more of a delusion, and the person living in a delusion, in a delusion, does not necessarily make them that they're actually on haqq. And that's the same thing here, in where even the gods that they were worshiping were really names that they themselves had made up. It doesn't really mean that those names are really names of gods or goddesses, and they were really just names that they themselves had invented. And that's the same thing when it comes to a lot of the different philosophies. And right now there's that trend, and where we're getting the youth, speak about being vegan and speak about all these things, and it's becoming this trend in where, yeah, I'm actually part of an identity, and I'm here, representing something. It's something that helps me view the world differently, and all these different things, and without them realizing, they're just things that they had invented. Somebody within in their own imagination thought that was thought that that was somehow looking more educated or making more sense, when in reality it is really the sense within their own mind, and not really something that reflects the realities around them, and not necessarily something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we're talking about realities around them, whether that was something that they had called God, or whether that was something in terms of justice and ethics. Because when we're talking about ethics, we're also talking about the implication of what does it mean to believe that there is a God. What does it mean? And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions to us that Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam says, "Ma anzalallahu biha min sultan," that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not send any evidence. There's no evidence to support that that claim that these things are from God Almighty. And then the implication to the definition of who is God or what is God is going to affect on ground the practice of it. And what does that practice of it mean? In al-hukmu illa lillah. So if you believe that life is matter in motion, well, the application and the implication of that belief is that morality, and there's no subjective morality. It's there, it's right there. This is connected to that. If you're going to believe that life is matter in motion, therefore there's no subjective meaning to morality, and it's all human invention. Same thing when we're talking about, if somebody is going to say that all these gods are really gods, when in reality they were just made up. The implication of that on ground is that they're going to be following their own invented understanding and definition of justice and ethics. So this is connected with that. Same thing when we're talking about the life that we're living in today, and where people are regarding life as matter in motion, and therefore every single person, although not necessarily calling them a god, but technically considering them that they are the ones to have the definition, and their view is to be respected in defining justice, or in defining right and wrong. And that their view is going to be that center to define right, wrong, to define even a person's view of their own selves. And that's the same thing when we're talking about, the philosophy of today, whether it's called existentialism, and where you're inventing, you're creating your purpose of existence, and not necessarily what the purpose that God Almighty had laid out. So when we're talking about in al-hukmu illa lillah, that this is related to that. In al-hukmu illa lillah, right here, that when who you define as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or as God is going to affect how you define the definitions of right, wrong, justice, and all the things that relate to it. أَمَرَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّهُ, that He had ordered that one would not worship but Him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but Him Almighty. Now, when we look at ta'budu, this is also telling us that when it comes to worship, that it includes, one, who you attribute as God Almighty and the actions of it. So when it comes to worship, it cannot be separated from what faith you have in understanding the world, understanding what is behind world, the creation itself, and who is behind the creation, and cannot be separated from what you define and how you define justice or ethics, because al-hukm would mean ruling, whether that meant the ruling on in terms of understanding of justice, understanding of right and wrong, understanding of life, etc. That in the end is going to be hukum, is going to be a ruling that you're going to attribute. ذَلِكَ الدِّينُ الْقَيِّمِ, that is the straight, that is the clear religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is really important, that ad-deen includes three parts: what you call God and who you attribute God Almighty, and even what you regard as legislature and what you do in ritual. This is really important to mention because you cannot separate these. So if somebody believes that, yes, I am Muslim, but I believe that eating meat, for example, is evil and brutal, this is straightforward kufr, because then you had regarded that that a legislature that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had regarded as permissible, you regarded it as that you are your own Lord and that you are above Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to and therefore disagreeing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this matter, and that as if you know more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Same thing if a person were to worship other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So worship, probably sitting in a setting or participating in some kind of a kufr ritual, that would actually mean that is haram. Or even calling something else as God, or attributing the divine attributes to somebody or something or someone other than to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Most people don't know, and of course when we're talking about don't know, what do they not know? Most people don't realize the relationship between what you attribute as to God and the implication in terms of legislature and behavior, and how it affects your ritual. All these three different things are connected to one another, and you cannot separate it, really. And most people don't realize how intertwined and how these three different factors are actually related to one another. Ya صاحبي السجن. Now he's taking that moment. Ya صاحبي السجن أأرباب أما أحدكما فيسقي ربه خمرا. So now he's taking Ya صاحبي السجن. صاحبي السجن, is it that he didn't know their names and he just said صاحبي السجن, meaning, you guys, you just came in, I don't really know you. Remember, because the ayah actually says وَدَخَلَ مَعَهُ السِّجْنَ فَتَيَّنْ, that two came in together with him into this prison. Now أَمَّا أَحَدُكُمَا, so now he's beginning that dream interpretation. He says أَمَّا أَحَدُكُمَا, as for the first, فَيَسْقِي رَبَّهُ خَمْرًا, the first one is going to be the person to perform the drinks, and in other words, within the kitchen, for Rabbahu. Who's Rabbahu here? Rabbahu is the king. So he's going to be the one that gives and serves the king khamra, those drinks, the alcohol drinks. As for the other one, فَيُصْلَبُ فَتَأْكُلُ الطَّيْرُ مِنْ رَأْسِهِ, the second one, the one who dreamt that he was on a cross and that there were birds that were eating. So it seemed like that these two guys were probably working in the kitchen or something. So one of them was, one of them was going to be the person to serve the drink, and the other one, it seems like, based on the beginning of the story, it seems like that they were accused of wanting, according to some mufassirin, of attempting to poison the king. And so in the end is that this guy doesn't get away with it. So what happens is that Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam says فَيُصْلَبْ, that he was going to get crucified, and when he gets crucified, the birds even will actually come and start picking and of course eating even from فَتَأْكُلُ الطَّيْرُ مِنْ رَأْسِهِ, they'll even start eating from his heads. Now, does that mean vultures? In the end, it's that birds. What are these birds eating? Is it the vultures? Is it, what kind of birds is it? That's not the issue. قُضِيَ الْأَمْرُ الَّذِي فِيهِ تَسْتَفْتِيَانِ. Now this is قُضِيَ الْأَمْرُ, meaning it was set, those two issues that they were inquiring about. تَسْتَفْتِيَانِ means inquiring. تَسْتَفْتِيَانِ, two of them were inquiring. وَقَالَ الَّذِي ظَنَّ أَنَّهُ نَاجٍ مِنْهُمَا. Now here continues the story. So now we're at a different setting. قال الذي ظن. So the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam was, interpreting the dreams to them, and he didn't really say who is who, but from the interpretation you could see, how does dream interpretation happen? What is it based on? Number one is that dream interpretation, let me actually clarify it, and hopefully I can write it here. So dream interpretation can be based on certain ulum, can be based on certain ulum, and those ulum such as, for example, knowing the situation in the situation that people are living in. For example, in the story where Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam is going to interpret the dream that the king is going to be seeing these cows eating thinner cows, and that usually the cows are a representation and things that represent harvest, that represent food coming in, etc. So that's where that correlation comes in. So one, it is the different things that people live on and what they represent in their life, and two, the Quran. So when we're looking at Quran, when we do dream interpretation, we're going to look at the words in the Quran or even hadith. The words in the Quran and hadith will oftentimes be used in order to understand in the dreams what these interpret. So let's give an example. If somebody were to dream of eating somebody else's plate, let's say it's a woman, she's dreaming that she's eating from somebody else's plate. And based on the hadith, is that the Prophet ﷺ actually said in the hadith that the woman should not empty her plate or empty somebody else's plate in order to keep it for herself. So from this hadith is that, so if a woman is seen, and this actually happened, a woman actually called me and she said that she was getting dreams, that she was sitting with this man and constantly taking the man's food, that is plate. She's with him in a restaurant. That's what she was seeing in the dream. She was taking his plate and starts eating from his plate, even though she had her own plate, but she would eat her plate. The girl, she tells me that she's seeing this dream often, and I just told her, and I asked her a question. I said, "Are you in a relationship?" And she said, "No, I'm not." I said, "Well, that's what the dream is telling me. The dream is telling me that you're in a relationship asking the man to divorce his wife." In the beginning, she denied, and she said that that's not true. I said, "I'm sorry, but that's what the dream is telling me, that you're in a relationship asking the man to divorce his wife so he could marry you." And then finally she admitted that was true, and she didn't know that was haram. But in the end is that a lot of the dreams, how did I interpret that dream, was actually based on the hadith. Same thing when we're looking at ayat, there would be that dream interpretation that is based on ayat and the words and what they resemble and so forth. Now, وَقَالَ الَّذِي ظَنَّ أَنَّهُ نَاجٍ مِّنْهُمَا. So one of them thought that the dream is telling him that he's going to be not crucified, but he's going to be that he's going to be safe, that he's going to be at least not the other person where the vultures and the birds are going to eat from his head, but he's going to be saved. And اذكرني عند ربك. So the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam actually told the one that he felt that he was going to be saved from it. اذكرني عند ربك. What does he tell him? He says, اذكرني, remember me, mention my name, عند ربك, in front of your Lord. Who's his Lord? The Lord is basically the king. فأنساه الشيطان ذكر ربه. Now here, فأنساه, here we go like that, فأنساه, meaning that just when Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam asked this man to mention him in front of the king, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying فأنساه الشيطان ذكر ربه, that shaitan had made him forget remembering his Lord. Meaning what? Meaning that shaitan made him forget that instead of asking this prisoner to mention his name in front of the king, he actually forgot to do the dhikr himself with his Lord Almighty, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So instead of asking the man to do that dhikr, why did you forget to do the dhikr? And as a result of forgetting that dhikr, فَلَبِثَ فِي السِّجْنِ بِضْعَ سِنِينَ. Because Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam forgot the dhikr, it could be the dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would save him from the sijn, from the prison that he was in, from the trauma that he was in. فَلَبِثَ فِي السِّجْنِ بِضْعَ سِنِينَ. He could have made the dua, but as a result, he actually ended up staying in the prison بِضْعَ سِنِينَ. So from 3 to 9 years is the amount of time he had stayed within that prison. Very long time. And of course, for some of you, it's like, yeah, that's not long. But for somebody that is staying in prison, every single minute counts. Every single hour. It is complete boredom. And throughout history, sijn and imprisonment was one of the worst tortures that man can be put in. وقال الملك إني أرى 7 بقرات ثمان يأكلهن 7 عجاف. Now the king, this is another scenario. What is the king seeing? So the king was now saying, I see, إني أرى, I see 7 cows, very siman, meaning very chubby cows, full cows, يأكلهن 7 عجاف. They're يأكلهن, they're eaten by 7 skinny cows, and 7 sunbulat. Sunbula is the wheat. سبع sunbulat, so 7 green wheat, and other that are dry and yellow. يا أيها الملأ أفتوني في رؤياي. It seemed like that was very common during during their culture, the issue of trying to interpret dreams and relating their life and their future on dreams. So in this, what we could see in this ayah is that يا أيها الملأ أفتوني, he's talking and referring and directing his words to al-mala. Al-mala is, the special elite. The special elite that were known to being specialized. And it was very common that sorcerers would use, as part of their profession, dream interpretation. So, in kuntum lirru'ya ta'burun. So, he was telling them, he was doubting that they were going to be able, in kuntum lirru'ya ta'burun. Here, it's basically reflecting that they were really, that the king was in doubt that they would be able to interpret that dream at all. So قالوا أضغاث أحلام. Their response to that, they just said أضغاث أحلام. أضغاث means it's just a mixed dreams that we can't really have a coherent interpretation. It's just a number of different things that don't really relate to one another, and therefore there's really no interpretation that can be done to it. It's just something that is irrelevant to your life. قالوا أضغاث أحلام وما نحن بتأويل الأحلام بعالمين. They just said, well, it's just, irrelevant dreams, had nothing to do with our life. وما نحن بتأويل الأحلام بعالمين. And we don't have the knowledge to interpret dreams. Like, at least they just wanted to get away with it. وقال الذي نجا منهما. Now here's one. The guy that had نجا منهما. منهما is referring to صاحبي السجن. Is referring to صاحبي السجن, the 2 guys that were in prison with Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. وقال الذي. As for the one, and the one that was saved from prison, وَادَّكَرَ بَعْدَ أُمَّةٍ. He remembered after an ummah. What is an ummah? After a generation had passed. Ummah, it's like, what makes an ummah? An ummah is a group of people. But here, this is talking about an ummah referring to a generation. A generation passed. Time had passed. He's an older person by now, but he remembered. أنا أنبئكم بتأويله. He said, I will be able to get you the interpretation for that dream. فأرسلون. Just send me over. يوسف أيها الصديق. Now he went over to Yusuf alayhi salam. أيها الصديق. Now here when we look at Yusuf أيها الصديق, he said, Yusuf, you the saint one. Siddiq is basically the saint. He was able to see during that time when he had stayed with him for a long time in prison that there was something exceptional about Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. He was not an ordinary man. He was a Siddiq. He was so pious. He was so pious. He was such a saint that he was actually like like a prophet, close to a prophet. Now he, not yet is Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam a prophet, at least from what the story is mentioning. Now Yusuf ayyuha Siddiq, he just called him Siddiq. Siddiq meaning you are such a saint. Aftina. Aftina means here's an inquiry. في 7 بقرات, about 7 cows that they're eating up 7 other skinny or thin cows, thin or weak cows, because ijaf, it can be thin, it can also be where they're totally worn out, they're so tired. وسبع سنبلات خضر, 7 wheat sticks, of course, or wheat stems, grains. وأخرى يابسات, and several other ones that are dry. لعلي أرجع إلى الناس لعلهم يعلمون. So he said, so that, just tell me the interpretation for the dream, and maybe I can go back to the people and that way inform them about what you're telling me. So Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, of course, this man is coming to him. He just, of course, he's right now considered, part of the elite because he's trusted by the king, and therefore the king is eating what this man is offering him. What this man is offering him. And of course, right here, he said, قَالَ تَزْرَعُونَ. Now this is Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam saying, you will تزرعون, you will plant for 7 years. 7 years, da'aba. These 7 years, you would, da'aba, meaning that you will plant for 7 years, and these 7 years will actually be very fertile. فَمَا حَصَدتُّمْ, but whatever you harvest, فَذَرُوهُ فِي سُنبُلِهِ, let that harvest stay within their stems. إِلَّا قَلِيلًا مِمَّا تَأْكُلُونَ, but you have to be balanced in the amount that you eat. ثُمَّ يَأْتِي, the reason why. ثُمَّ يَأْتِي, then later, after that, there will be 7 years of drought. Those 7 years of drought, يَأْكُلْنَ مِمَّا قَدَّمْتُمْ, they will eat up all the things that you had already planted earlier. إِلَّا قَلِيلًا مِمَّا تُحْصِنُونَ, unless you had preserved some of it as for the coming years. ثُمَّ يَأْتِي مِنْ بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ عَامٌ فِيهِ يُغَاثُ النَّاسُ وَفِيهِ يَعْصِرُونَ. And here brings them hope. But after these years of drought, there's going to be another couple years. بعد ذلك عام, another year, فِيهِ يُغَاثُ النَّاسُ. People will be getting lots of rain, and they will be getting lots to squeeze and lots to have for food. وَقَالَ الْمَلِكُ ائْتُونِي بِهِ. The king then announced it. He said, bring him to me. ائتوني به. فلما جاءه الرسول قال ارجع إلى ربك. The king had made an announcement. He said, go get him for me. When that messenger that was sent by the king was sent to Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, he had the izzah. And this is something, ya Allah, it's so sad. During our times, we're finding many people not having izzah, not having that honor, and especially the honor to preserve the deen. The honor to preserve the deen is one of the most important things. Even if you want to give da'wah, make sure you don't let your deen dishonored under the pretense of getting da'wah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا يَسْتَخِفَنَّكَ الَّذِينَ لَا يُوقِنُونَ. Don't let those that don't have yaqeen, don't let those that are disbelievers, or those that mock the religion, don't let them see you as khafif, somebody without izzah. Have the izzah, have that honor. Have that honor and preserve the deen's honor, especially if you're doing da'wah. فَلَمَّا جَاءَهُ الرَّسُولُ قَالَ ارْجَعْ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ. When that king's messenger, meaning the kind of like an ambassador, the special person that is from the king that was sent, what did he say? قَالَ ارْجَعْ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ. He could have just, here it is, now it's time for me to get out. But he said, go back to your king and ask him, مَا بَالُ النِّسْوَةِ اللَّاتِي لَقَطَّعْنَ أَيْدِيَهُنَّ. What about, ask him about the women that had cut their hands, that they cut their hands. Inna Rabbi bikaydihinna alim. He knows, that king knows what they had done. Now, if you're going to interpret this Inna Rabbi bikaydihinna alim, you can interpret it as Inna Rabbi meaning the king, and you can also interpret it as Inna Rabbi meaning my Lord Almighty knows all the different details of their plots. It was one plot after another. It wasn't one, but it was so many plots. It was endless. بِكَيْدِهِنَّ عَلِيمٌ. قَالَ مَا خَطْبُكُنْ. Now, the king interrogates. قَالَ مَا خَطْبُكُنْ. Now the king is interrogating the women. What is wrong with you? What is the story? When you had tried to seduce Yusuf away from himself, their response, قُلْنَا حَاشَ لِلَّهِ. The reality, حَاشَ لِلَّهِ. حَاشَ لِلَّهِ is like, there's no one like unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. مَا عَلِمْنَا عَلَيْهِ مِن سُوءٍ. We don't know of any evil thing that he had committed, any misbehavior, any illicit behavior that he had committed. Now, Imra'atul Aziz, the wife of Al-Aziz, Imra'atul Aziz, meaning the wife of the king himself. She said, Al-ana hasas al-haq. Now the truth has been revealed. It was actually I that had tried to seduce him of himself, and he is actually an honest one. ذَلِكَ لِيَعْلَمَ أَنِّي لَمْ أَخُنْهُ بِالْغَيْبِ. She still has her eyes on him. She said, just to let him know that I'm not going to betray him behind his back. Still had her eyes on him, and she still wanted to somehow, I guess, present herself that she was not an evil woman. Just as inni lam akhunhu bil ghaib. What did you think you had done? You plotted to put him in prison for several years, but she still wanted to present herself as if she is a trustworthy and a very good woman, that she was not going to lie about him. ذلك ليعلم أني لم أخنه بالغيب وأن الله لا يهدي كيد الخائنين. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not, وأن الله لا يهدي كيد الخائنين. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not let the plots of those that betray actually be going in guidance. So now let's see what she does. وَمَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي. And she says, and I will not claim to be innocent. Okay? I will not claim to be innocent. إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَّارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ. Because in nafs itself, our own inclinations, they seduce us, they order us, they motivate us to do they motivate us to do the wrong thing. Now with her wise words, إِلَّا مَا رَحِمَ رَبِّي. Except those that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had shed his mercy on. Inna Rabbi Ghafurur Rahim. My Lord Almighty is Ghafurur Rahim. Is she here referring Inna Rabbi to the king, or is she referring to God, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? different interpretations. Inna Rabbi Ghafur Rahim. Is she referring that, my dear king, you are going to be forgiving and you're going to be merciful. You're going to let go. You're not going to here punish me for this. Because here I am, I'm confessing. I'm confessing to the wrong things that I'm doing, so just let it go. Or is she really saying, Illa ma rahima Rabbi? Is she really a believer and is she really Muslim? And she says, that inna nafsa la'ammara bisu, that our own inclinations can sometimes motivate us to do the wrong thing. Ammara actually comes from the root amara, which means to order, meaning our own inclinations are constantly ordering us. They're constantly demanding from us that we would obey our own nafs. Now, speaking of ammara bisu, that in nafs, we actually have 3 different kinds of nafs. I'm just going to, just a little bit. So we've got in nafs al-ammara bisu, and we also have in nafs al-lawama, and there's also in nafs al-mutma'inna. Now, scholars had different opinions. Let me first interpret the words. Ammara bisu means the nafs that orders for evil. Lawama means the one that is constantly blaming itself. All right, the nafs that's constantly blaming itself. And the nafs, hold on. And the nafs that is lawama is the one that's blaming itself. Sorry about that, about my laptop. Sometimes it's plays games on me. In nafs sorry about that. I don't know how to do this. Okay, hold on. All right. So in nafs al-mutma'inna is the nafs that is content. Now, scholars had different opinions on whether this nafs is for every single person or whether this nafs, some people are ammara bisu, some other people their nafs is mutma'inna, or other people their nafs is lawama. Or is it that every single one of us has one side of their nafs, ammara bisu, that's constantly ordering them for what is wrong, and at other times it's blaming itself, why did it do the wrong thing, and if it does the good thing, it's feeling that stability, that content on the inside. So looking at these, like I said, differences of opinions between scholars on whether this is actually in every single one of us, or whether we grow in the different maqamat, we grow in the different levels. Maqam in where in the beginning we in our life, there's that part where it's constantly ordering us to do what's wrong. You're sitting down and your nafs is telling you to do haram things. Your nafs is telling you to pick on other people, etc. But then you're feeling regret. You grow and you start realizing that you grow in your iman, that is, you start realizing that, why did I do this? You start blaming yourself. You start feeling that regret inside yourself. Now, when we grow in our iman, then you're growing into then realizing that this was wrong, and then you start going into a level where you're away and you are very well trained to not even commit the sin, and therefore you are mutma'inna, therefore you are at a level of tama'nina, you're at a level of content, and this is this is one tafsir. All right. إلا ما رحم وقال الملك ائتوني به. Now the king, after interrogating all those women, interrogating his wife, now it is clearly a plot. It was a clear plot from the women. So the king is now saying, ائتوني به, bring him to me. أستخلصه لنفسي. After all this had been clear, after it was clear that this man was an innocent man that had stayed for a number of years, and we had seen his ability to even interpret and even have the knowledge, أستخلصه لنفسي, I'm going to keep him as the chosen one near me, kind of like the advisor for my own self, a close person to be within my kingdom. فلما كلمه قال إنك اليوم لدينا مكين أمين. Now the king is talking directly to the Prophet Yusuf, to Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, and says, قال إنك اليوم لدينا مكين أمين. He said, today you are makinun amin. Now remember the ayat in Surah Yusuf, there's always makanna li Yusuf. There's always that he will be granted a position, that he will be granted power. Makanna, there's always makanna li Yusuf. And you could see even in Surah Yusuf, وَكَذَلِكَ مَكَّنَّا لِيُوسُفَ and وَكَذَلِكَ مَكَّنَّا لِيُوسُفَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. That was mentioned actually twice. مكنا ليوسف. So here you could see again how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though in the beginning just as makanna, because that is to come. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now lets the king use the exact same word, and he says, لَدَيْنَا مَكِينٌ أَمِينٌ. Now you are in a place, makin, in a place of authority and a person that we can trust. Now, Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam didn't want to be just near the king and in a place of advisory, but he actually wanted to use his knowledge to benefit the community. So what did he do? He requested, قَالَ جَعَلْنِي عَلَى خَزَائِنِ الْأَرْضِ. He said, let me be the treasurer. The خزائن الأرض, خزائن الأرض, خزائن is basically the storage, الأرض, earth. So when we're talking about storage on earth, it's kind of like the Minister of Agriculture, the Minister of Treasury, the treasurer right here. إني حفيظ عليم. إني حفيظ عليم, meaning that I'm able, حفيظ, I'm able to keep track of things, and alim, and I've got the knowledge to keep things in place. He's got the knowledge, and he's keeping records of things, unlike, for example, the king, why did Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam stay in the king's prisons for so many years? Well, that tells you that there was a lot of corruption. And that's where Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam said, you know what? This governance really needed record keeping. Somebody to keep records of what is happening and even have the knowledge. Just as we can have people stay in prisons with no records to make sure that these people are not forgotten in prisons. So same thing, that these people could easily lose records of all the different goods that are and the harvest that country is bringing in, and they could easily lose track. And then eventually it will cost people lives. It will cost them down the road their lives, because they're coming in for some drought. So Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. Now, question, is it okay to request a job? To request a job, meaning to say, well, you know what, I have the ilm, I would like to be a professor, I would like to be a judge, or I'd like to be such and such. There are differences of opinions between scholars, and the reason why is that the Prophet ﷺ, because the Prophet ﷺ actually said that whoever would request, or whoever would be given il-qada, the position of being a judge, فَقَدْ ذُبِحَ بِغَيْرِ سِكِينٍ, then they would be slaughtered without even using a knife. And from there that some scholars said that it would be haram to request a position, and that you should be granted based on your qualification from those that are qualified, to see whether you are qualified for such positions or not. Having that being said, you know, Shari'atu man qablana, is it Shari'atun lana? Is the Sharia of the prophets before us our Sharia as well? Differences of opinions between scholars, but can we necessarily use this as an evidence to say, you know what, here are my degrees, here are my qualifications, here's my experience, and I would like to get such an X and Y position. And if somebody says, well, that's haram to ask for it, because you know, you're praising yourself, and the ayah says, وَلَا تُزَكُّوا أَنفُسَكُمْ, you're praising yourself in an interview, you're praising yourself. So here, differences of opinions between scholars. To What is the preponderant ruling? Wallahu a'lam. If you see within yourself the qualification to hold a certain position, it is okay to present yourself without any kind of lying. So don't lie about your qualifications just to get a position, because in the end it's an aman. But if you know yourself that you do have that qualification, it is okay to scrutinize it in order to get a job, on a condition that you don't lie about it, you don't exaggerate your qualifications, but that you would actually get paid for such a position. إني حفيظ عليم وكذلك مكنا ليوسف. Here's again مكنا. That وكذلك, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding us. Remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used the word كذلك in Surah Yusuf a number of times in order to help us learn, how things relate to one another, and that you cannot disconnect them. كذلك was actually mentioned in Surah Yusuf 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. 7 times كذلك, that in order for you to relate to how things, your actions, and how they eventually affect and bring about the result and affect the change. So the beginning, if you want to change your future, you start from now. You want to change the future that that will happen to you, or what will unfold to you in 10 years, you got to start from now. And that's the same thing. كَذَلِكَ مَكَّنَّا لِيُوسُف, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that the story of and how it unfolded, from the beginning is really to get to مَكَّنَّا لِيُوسُف. This is how Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam was given authority after being at the very low end within that well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying مكنا ليوسف, and this is really important. يتبوأ منها حيث يشاء. يتبوأ منها, meaning that now he is taking, not only is he in a position, but he is the one that is choosing the position that he wants to be in. There's a difference. You can be given authority and not like your job. But here Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam is not only given authority, but in a job that he himself wants. Something that he himself enjoys doing. يتبوأ منها حيث يشاء, in where he would choose in whatever position he wants and enjoys, and he knows that he can master. نصيب برحمتنا من نشاء. Why is that the case? نصيب برحمتنا من نشاء. That is from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you would also get tamkeen, you would also get an authority, independence, power, and you would also be in something that you also enjoy doing. All right? Birahmatina, that is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning what? It is so often that many people would feel that they were abused, that other people are taking advantage of them, etc. And the list goes on and on. You always have to remember Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. He was taken advantage of. He was abused. He was also facing all the traumas. But don't relate to yourself and consider that I passed all these traumas, therefore I am doomed. No. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us throughout Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam's story that the issue of getting authority, that issue of going into positions of power, meaning that you're gaining all that ability, in where it is all starting from that the person would be connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and put their trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because at that moment when Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam depended on that other prisoner and told him, اذكرني عند ربك, Shaitan made him forget his Lord Almighty, and then he stayed in prison for several years. But at the same time, a very beautiful story Ali Tantawi mentions. He mentions a story, and he said that one time he was a judge in Syria. He was a judge in Syria, and he remembered that while he was while he was with a group of those judges, I guess having a good time at night, a group of judges sitting together at night, and it's, discussing different stories and, learning from one another. He said, I felt like something was just holding me from my throat. I felt like I couldn't even breathe. He said, I got out to go for a walk because he wasn't able to breathe. He said, I felt like I was just grasping for air. He goes out, and then he's listening, just as sitting down outside, walking outside, he all of a sudden hears a woman crying in the background. He goes towards that crying noise, and then he asks, and he sees a woman, and he says, what's wrong with you? And she says, I have a lot of things to say. You're not going to be able to do anything. So he says, well, why don't you tell me? Maybe I can. So she says, it's something between me and my husband. Now, he was a judge. She didn't know who she was talking to. So he told her, why didn't you go to the court and complain? She said, no court would listen to me. I'm just a poor woman with nowhere to go. So no judge is going to listen to me. And he was listening to her words, and he said, can you tell me what the story is? She said, well, my husband, he beat me and tortured me, kicked me out of the house, and took my children away. I don't have any family to support me. I have no money to give me any support or even any food. And he said, I looked at the situation at that moment and realized that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala got me, the judge, pulled me out of the place that I was resting in from my throat, got me to see this poor woman. And this woman did not know that she was actually speaking to the judge himself. When we look at those times, we could see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this woman, the judge, she didn't go to the judge was brought to her. And how he was brought to her by his own throat. Get out and walk to that woman. Get out and walk to that poor woman. This woman was just making dua, and the judge was brought to her. She didn't go on her feet to the judge. And here you could see that tamkeen. That is the power without you realizing. When we look at dua, and when we look at how one can be at the lowest ends, the lowest weakness, that weakness where you don't know how to get that power, how to get that support, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings it for you. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna Allah yudafi 'anil ladhina amanu. Just when you thought it's about you mastering the power, mastering the positions, mastering the words to protect yourself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, Inna Allah yudafi 'anil ladhina amanu. Be from the believers. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, verily, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that will defend those that are believers. And that's the same thing. In where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you put your hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you that tamkeen, that power. Don't be dragged. Don't be dragged with your nafs in seeking power, in seeking positions, but let Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you the power, but you submit to the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you will be getting that power. وَلَا نُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Remember, the word al-muhsinin was actually mentioned a couple of times in Surah Yusuf alayhi salam, and here let's count them: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. Let's read those ayat. وكذلك نجزي المحسنين إنا نراك من المحسنين ولا نضيع أجر المحسنين إنا نراك من المحسنين. Again in ayah 78, لا يضيع أجر المحسنين. Notice that لا نضيع أجر المحسنين, لا يضيع أجر المحسنين was mentioned twice in Surah Yusuf. إنا نراك من المحسنين was mentioned twice in Surah Yusuf. كذلك نجزي المحسنين was mentioned once in Surah Yusuf. Just that ولا نضيع أجر المحسنين again as a complete lesson for all of us to learn, that you be from the muhsineen. What is a muhsin? A muhsin is somebody that sees beyond the materialistic things, that they had totally embraced, that their actions, their behavior, their heart, their mind has filled their faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It has been filled with the faith of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they started living those words. They live the words of what it means to be honest. They're not just honest frequently, but now honesty has filled them. All they will speak in is honesty. All that they will behave in is fairness and justice. All that they will behave in is really the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now when we look at وَلَا نُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us right there that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not lose keeping track of the good things that al-muhsineen will do. And therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, be from the muhsineen, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you the tamkeen, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you the power, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be there for you to support you even during those times of weakness. وَلَأَجْرُ الْآخِرَةِ خَيْرٌ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَكَانُوا يَتَّقُونَ. وَلَأَجْرُ الْآخِرَةِ, and yes, you will get the tamkeen in the dunya, but the reward even in the akhirah, the reward in the akhirah is even better than the tamkeen or the power that they will be given in this dunya. لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَكَانُوا يَتَّقُونَ. For those that are mu'mineen, for those that let faith not be a place in their heart, but they will put it into practice. وَكَانُوا يَتَّقُونَ. Not only put it into practice, but they will even keep distance between them and sin. They know what leads to haram, so they will keep distance between them and those haram things in order to maintain their iman. We'll end right here, and next week inshallah we'll see everyone. And somebody shared something and said the story reminded me of the imam that got dragged by his legs at the baker, which is Ahmad ibn Hanbal, right? When he was actually dragged, and his dua, and the story is that Ahmad ibn Hanbal was, seeing, he was at the baker, and the baker was telling him, every dua that I had made or that I had ever done was actually answered except one dua. And he said, which dua was that? And he said that I would see Ahmad ibn Hanbal. And he said, I was dragged by my legs. He was actually pushed inside. And remember, at the time they didn't have any images of the people. And he didn't recognize Ahmad ibn Hanbal. And he said, well, here I am. I was actually dragged to you. And subhanallah, absolutely, even if you are dead, the story of the man, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can actually answer the dua even if the person is actually dead. Even, of course, they made the dua while they're living, but the dua can be answered even after their death. Just like the story Storm in the Ship, which is the story of Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak. Inshallah, we'll say the story later, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Jazakumullah khairan for listening. Any questions, I'd be happy to answer, inshallah. All right, so assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We'll see you all. One question. Go ahead, Zainab. You want to be unmuted? I will do that. Go ahead, Sister Zainab.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
So I just needed some clarity. So yesterday when I was speaking and I mentioned the aim is the ajr of Allah. and it hit in my heart now when I was thinking about it. Is that a type of shirk when you say the aim is Jannah, the aim is the ajr, the aim is good deeds, instead of saying the aim is that Allah is pleased with you?
No, there's no contradiction, because when you aim Jannah, you actually aim the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you aim Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's no contradiction in that whatsoever. That ibtigha al-Jannah is actually ibtigha ridwan Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's actually seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be content over you. So it's not at all shirk. In fact, that's part of al-Iman. So it's not at all whatsoever. So no, it is actually not contradictory, and it's part of al-Iman.
Alhamdulillah. Okay, thank you so much.
Yes,
Barakallahu
Allah
feek.
يبارك
And
فيك.
it's always wonderful to come Friday and listen to your tafsir, mashallah.
الله يرضى عنك يا ربي، الله يحفظك.
May Allah bless you.
آمين.
Assalamu alaikum.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.